TORAEL presents this English fastest theory. Can you feel this atmosphere? Just same as Wall Street Journal. This is a special program at the Wall Street Journal Tokyo Bureau. This program is planned and brought to you to feel American journalism closer. Please try to understand in English. If you can't get it free, please use translation followed by this entire recording. Today, we have great opportunity to talk with Sレシンガー氏, the Wall Street Journal Tokyo Bureau Chief, Harvard graduate, 2003 Pulitzer Prize winner, in explanatory reporting for the Fat Wrong series, a series of stories that exposed and elucidated corporate scandals in the US. Jake-san, I'm excited to talk with you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for coming.
Jake-san worked in the journal's Tokyo Bureau as a reporter from 1989 to 1994. After extraordinary work in Washington, Jake-san returned to Tokyo as a chief in 2010. The Wall Street Journal is one of the top quality paper characterized by the splendid analysis and reliable information, especially in emergencies such as the devastating earthquake and subsequent nuclear reactor meltdown. I clearly remember that the inside story in which our government and TEPCO refused to accept nuclear accident rescue package proposed by Hillary Clinton before the reactor meltdown. I was filled with resentment amid turmoil. I guess the journal has huge information sources inside governments, army, and a key organization. This is why high-income, intelligent businessmen rush to read the Wall Street Journal. Can you elaborate more on what makes difference from other papers such as Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, etc.?
Sure. First of all of those news organizations that you name are also excellent news organizations and also produce top quality journalism. But we do think there are some things that distinguish the Wall Street Journal from them if you look at the whole Wall Street Journal news organization. One is that the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones are now owned by News Corporation, which is one of the strongest and largest and most powerful and successful news companies in the world. And so at a time when most other news organizations are struggling financially, we have the resources to remain stable, to maintain our staff, to grow, and to experiment. And I should say that News Corp not only brings resources to us, but a real dynamism and a creativity about sort of the future of news. And so it's a very exciting environment to be part of a clever and creative news organization. So I think that's one thing that differentiates us. Another is we own not just the Wall Street Journal, but WSJ.com. We have a Japanese language website, JWSJ.com. We have a newswire, Dow Jones Newswires, and all of those things fit together. We also have an increasingly active and aggressive video operation. And I think that of all the news organizations you mentioned, they have some elements of those, but I think we are unusual in providing the total package. But most importantly, I think the thing that any news organization prides itself in is its journalism. And we do think that the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones we set a particularly high standard for the integrity of our reporting, for the depth and as you noted, the analysis of our reporting, that particularly when it comes to business, financial, economic news, we don't consider those to be exclusively what we work on, but those are the main focus of what we're doing. So it's a main emphasis for us, and so particularly in those areas we think we provide a level of excellence that we like to think is unmatched. So
I see. Wall Street Journal has video. This compact and condensed information source is useful for businessmen. I'm a tech geek, so that I like Mr. Mossberg's report from Silicon Valley. And I also like Lady Gaga's interview
Right.
and Wine Appreciation program. And the video from Japan is variable in different sense. In March 12th, your video comment on recovery continues in Japan 1 year later is impressive, so impressive. Responding negative New York comments, you said, our economy is resilient and will show an ability to adapt. Why do you think so, even in these adverse economic conditions?
That's an excellent question. Before I answer that, though, I first want to thank you for noticing our video, and also to say that that is an area where we are also expanding. I should say I was just in New York 2 weeks ago for a special internal seminar or conference on increasing our digital journalism, we call it, and expansion of the use of video, photos, tweets, social media. And so we actually do think video in a lot of ways is the future for newspapers, which is kind of ironic. But that is an important emphasis for us, so I thank you for highlighting that. In terms of the comments on Japan's economy, I think that people tend to forget that Japan does have a lot of strengths, that it still is an economy that works, that if you visit, as I just did, New York, and then you come back to Tokyo, while New York is a great city, that the service that you get in the United States on U.S. airlines, just the way that when you walk around the city, all the hazards and the pitfalls and staying in an American hotel, you realize that that Japan actually does still have tremendous strengths in terms of quality of service, customer service, and just keeping basic things working that I think the United States and others still have a lot to learn from. Japan still has a highly educated workforce. Japan still has a lot of money, and it's very interesting that when you look at a lot of the discussions in Asia, whether it was in the last weekend in April, or the second to last weekend in April, when you had the president of Myanmar come to Japan for the first time in 28 years, you had a leader of that country because he feels that his country can get a lot of money and learn a lot from Japan, that as Southeast Asia grows, Japan still plays a major role, and Asia, after all, is the fastest growing region in the world, and so Japan has an advantage that certainly the Europeans don't have, which is to be stuck in a region of the world that's really struggling and shrinking, and those are some of the reasons.
Okay. Jake-san is a top expert of Japanese politics. I was fascinated to read your book, 1996, this bestseller, Shadow Shogun. Brilliant chronicles of money politics of Kakue Tanaka and fellow politicians, Shin Kanemaru and Nobuo Takeshita, Ichiro Ozawa. I enjoy the pronunciation code, Konchikusho.
Right.
Kanemaru, Takeshita, and Ozawa. You carefully depict our political system, such as power structure, bureaucratic domination, and men's jealousy. What motivates you to perform such a detailed, in-depth research and analysis and finally publish it?
First of all, I am what we call in America a political junkie. So I just like politics, whether it's American politics or Japanese politics or other countries' politics. I think for some people, it's like following sports. And so I just find it very interesting, in some ways different than sports, though, of course, because the implications and the stakes are higher. And obviously it's very serious, and I don't mean to make light of it, but just as you say, the fascinating personalities involved and the interactions make it a very interesting area to study. Japan in particular, the reason I wrote this book, as you'd mentioned, I lived here from 1989 to 1994, and when I first moved to Japan, this was at the peak of the bubble, and of course at the time, nobody knew that it was a bubble. They thought that Japan was this highly successful political and economic model, and Japan was sort of taking over the world. It had a very successful industry, and I think one of the elements that people didn't understand about it was the political side. I mean, that people knew all about Japanese management theory and Sony and Honda and Toshiba and Toyota, but they didn't really know about the politics so much. And so I thought, here is an area, a very important part of the Japanese system that Americans don't understand, and that in the end you can't really understand how all of Japan, or so-called Japan Inc. works without understanding its political system.
Oh, I see. politics is the epitome of mentality.
Right.
You know much about our culture. I think basic spiritual nature of Japan hasn't changed over 1,000 years. As you'd seen in Tohoku, Fukushima Prefecture, after the devastating earthquake, ordinary people, Japanese attitude was highly appreciated from all over the world. おかげさまで、恥、誠、忍耐, that is Bushido. Now, Ryoma Sakamoto is quite popular in Japan. If young lady rush to read Ryoma, it seems pendulum of history since March 11th. Do you think this movement someday will reach a tipping point and cause fundamental change to our notorious revolving door politics? Like Meiji Shin, and do you think next kingmaker will emerge?
Well, those are very good questions that I'm sorry to say I don't really know the answers to. I have found the revolving door of Japanese politics, particularly for the prime ministers, to be very surprising, and I think for the Japanese people and actually for Japan's allies in Washington and elsewhere, very frustrating. But the theories for why it continues seem to be very hard to explain. When I first wrote my book, one of the things I thought was interesting was at the time there was a big push to change the electoral system. That was one of the things that Mr. Ichiro Ozawa was pushing, and there was an argument that if Japan could change the way the politicians were elected to the Diet, that would change the political system. They changed the way the politicians were elected to the Diet, but it does not seem to have made much difference, at least yet, in revolving door politics. Another argument was that you had a revolving door politics because you just had one party in power, so there was never any threat and you could have rapid turnover of LDP prime ministers. Now we've had a change in power, but now we're on our third prime minister in 3 years less than 3 years for the new ruling party. So it's really hard to see what will change that revolving door, and you kind of hope that something would, but you're not sure. You mentioned Meiji Ishin. As you know, the sort of new exciting personality in Japanese politics is Hashimoto Toru of Osaka, and he refers to the Ishin the Ishin no Kai as his party. So clearly he is hoping that he is the force, or the kingmaker, if you will, who will change that. But I've seen many people come and go. Everyone you may remember was very excited about Hosokawa Morihiro in 1993, and he quickly disappeared. Yukio Hatoyama had 70% popularity when he first became prime minister, and he quickly disappeared. So it's very hard to know. You mentioned the next kingmaker. Of course, what's interesting is whether the old kingmaker, that is Ichiro Ozawa, is still around. We're speaking now on Tuesday, April 24th, and on Thursday, April 26th, the court will rule whether he is guilty or not guilty in his criminal case. And so perhaps people who are listening to this will already know the outcome, which we don't know now. But if he is ruled to be not guilty, it is quite possible that he will once again increase his powers as a kingmaker. So he's not gone yet.
Yes. Thank you. It seems journalism is like bellwether. However, as history suggests, bureaucrats, politicians, and big business, including Yakuza, has power to control media. As for Olympus scandal, TEPCO, Fukushima, big earthquakes, valuable information always comes from overseas. Although foreign media are less susceptible to domestic power over Kisha Club system, I found crucial revision in your paper. Have you and your colleague felt pressure from the power? If permissible, could you tell outdated item, etc.? And could you please give message to current and future reader concerning future media coverage?
Yes, I am not aware of any serious pressure that we have received either in Tokyo or in Washington to stop us from publishing a story. That doesn't mean that people don't complain or try and persuade us not to go ahead and write a story that is critical of them, but we've never felt somehow that if we knew our story was correct, that we could not go ahead and publish it. I don't know whether, in fact, that's really true that the Japanese press doesn't publish because of pressure or whether it's other forces sometimes that stop them to do that. I wondered in particular, when you look at how the Olympus scandal was covered, it felt to me like once the scandal really took off, the Japanese press was incredibly aggressive about exposing various elements of wrongdoing. I think maybe it had to do more with the fact that the news came out through the foreign CEO, someone who probably talked a lot more to the Western press than the Japanese press, and I think therefore they didn't quite know what to make of what he was saying. But in general, it is true that sometimes the Western press writes more stories about Japan in certain areas than the Japanese do, but I don't know whether it's because of pressure or because of other forces.
So I appreciate the Wall Journal, since the journal transforms complex and ambiguous things to easily understandable format. Thank you. We should read Wall Journal. Jake-san, thank you very much for taking time with us. And we including our listener, really enjoy this conversation from the world's most influential paper, Tokyo headquarters.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed the conversation very much, and I do encourage your listeners to read the Wall Street Journal both in English and on our Japanese language website. And I think some people have found that another good form of English study is actually to compare the English and the Japanese stories. So I hope that people will read those as well.
Thank you, Jake-san. I'm Kenny Takese with
Jake Schlesinger, The Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you so much.